So I'm going to start out with a few questions before we turn it over to you. From a filmmaking perspective, I'm always interested in the journey question, but especially for this film, meaning I'm curious to know what film you thought you were making when you went to Russia in 2021, both in terms of subject matter and in terms of form, and how that story evolved.
Yeah, that's a very good question to start with. So in the late summer of 2021, I read a story in New York Times about Russian journalists who had just started to be named foreign agents and were fighting back with dark humor. I think that was the headline. And there was a picture of two very cool-looking women. One of them was Olga Churakova here. And I admit it was the photograph that partially drew me in. And Olga was one of the first people being named, who was named a foreign agent, I think, and you were in the first batch of 25, right? You were one of the first. And I thought, this is really interesting. And so I contacted Anya, whom I knew, Anna Nemzer. And I said, something's going on here, because a lot of media had started to be named foreign agents. TV Rain had already been named a foreign agent. And I remember we said, okay, well, let's make a film about this. People are starting to be singled out. For me, the idea of a society starting to force people to mark themselves. Obviously, there's, historic precedent of this, forcing to mark themselves everywhere as not belonging, not one of us, and seemed something was going on, and this was interesting, and obviously we didn't know what this would lead to. I think when I was filming it, everybody had a sense that things were going to get worse, but I think everyone expected the monster to eat them. Everyone was trying to figure out, how long can I keep working here in this country? How long can I stay and fight here? What they didn't expect is that the monster would invade the neighboring country, Ukraine.
Yeah, definitely. And living in Russia, we pretty much got used to the feeling that something is happening, something really bad is happening, something bad is going to happen. And when Julia called me, I have this very simple approach. If you can make this historical record, if you can film it, if you can record it, you should do it right now, immediately, and then we'll figure it out. But I remember our conversation. Do you remember it in Tbilisi in December 2021 when I was asking, we started filming already, and I was asking, do we really want to film this this idea, to show this idea? Do we really want to show this exotic country with some decent people living in it and make this very exotic story and so on? And then all of a sudden we realized that this isn't an exotic story anymore. And it definitely became something that affects the whole world. And that's how Putin and Russia became our co-authors at some point. Like, we used to make jokes that so-called Ministry of so-called Justice in Russia is our cast director, because they were declaring people foreign agents, and we realized that we have to get in touch with these people and start filming them. And so Putin helped us here. And it is definitely not a local exotic story anymore, unfortunately.
And I'm just wondering, in terms of form, too. I mean, you shot this movie on an iPhone. You're the sound, you're the camera, except when some of your participants share some of their footage. And did you always know that it would have to be that way out of necessity because you were trying to be under the radar, or?
No, not at all. In fact, I remember, I think the first thing we did, because it took me a few weeks to get a Russian visa, was Anya organized a Zoom call with a bunch of the foreign agents and people we thought were going to be foreign agents, and also Ksenia here. And I remember saying to all these journalists, and I think they thought I was a little strange, I said, if I know what the movie is, I don't think we need to make it. And I have no idea what it's going to look like. I don't know what we're going to do. I flew over the day after I got a visa. I was going to try out a few camera people to just see, you know, I thought it was a research trip. And I had a cameraman, a very wonderful documentary cinematographer coming over, and Anya was hosting this dinner at her house. And he was going to come film. I was going to see how it is working with him. And then Anya's like, well, you know, we'd feel more comfortable with just you. You're our friend. Can you borrow his camera? I borrowed his camera about half an hour before the dinner, and I could not figure out the settings. He had some kind of follow focus. I'd never used it. And, things were happening. So I just picked up what was, at that time, a 4-year-old iPhone. It was an iPhone 10. It was very, very far behind the times. I needed a new one and with a dying battery. And I started filming, and I never looked back. It felt so right, you know. I borrowed a microphone, and then everything kind of happened that way. Like, it's not that I planned to have these sections with Anya driving and talking as a device, you know. It's there was a lot of traffic in Moscow, and it took us a long time to get places, and I was like, well, might as well film, you know. So everything was really organic, and I think with all of you, I showed up at your doorstep with a camera, with my phone.
It was very annoying.
I can imagine I was terribly annoying. I would probably imagine I would be more annoying with a big camera, I want to believe, but it was, yeah.
One word in defense, if I may. She was annoying, definitely, but at the same time, she was absolutely invisible with her iPhone, which was incredibly important because at some point we all started just talking, just discussing things which were important for us at that moment, and we didn't see you, and it was important. Maybe you were annoying, but at the same time, you were so professional.
Quietly annoying.
Quietly annoying, yeah.
I mean, I guess for me, one of the effects of that, which is one of the things I really admire about the film, is that we see these brave journalists, but we also see them in moments of so-called normalcy in their everyday lives. And again, I'm wondering, I mean, was that just in terms of when you were editing? To me, it's important because it shows that you're ordinary people, but also heroic journalists at the same time. I'm wondering if that was something you were thinking about while you were shooting, or you were just shooting what you could, and then it sort of came that you wanted those moments in the editing?
Well, I make both fiction and documentary, so I'm interested in people. I'm interested in these amazing women as people, and I'm also very interested in kind of how momentous historic events are surrounded by the everyday. They're surrounded by the texture of life, and people have real lives in the midst of it. And I think if anything makes this film work, it's that, you know, and I'm very grateful that you allowed me to be annoying, and that you opened up to me and, you know, shared yourselves with me. And I think that's what makes it.
You know, I'm saying it with love.
But I do want to ask...
just wanted to clarify that.
I do want to ask the participants just about some of their thought processes that they went through when Julia approached you about being part of the project, and how you decided to let her film you.
Okay, I can go first. So it was not easy for us, I think, to do it, because as a journalist, we usually to do it with other people. So it's like, usually it's our role to be someone who, you know, observe someone's lives. And it was really a challenging thing to do, suddenly to become an object for Julia. And I think it's something in her personality that allowed us to be with her, I don't know, really friends. We became really friends, you know. And she's like very important person in my life, and we had many things. Yeah, I don't know. So it's all about Julia.
It's all about you, but I have to say, like, one of the things that, you know, I hate being filmed, I hate being photographed, like this is a nightmare for me, so I completely sympathize and understand that, but one of the things that I thought of you as fellow storytellers and then collaborators in a way, and I was being complicit in the process because you were aware. And there's this moment where I showed up and Ksenia was crying in a cafe, and I was just we were supposed to meet in the cafe. Like, I literally walked in, she was on this call, it's what we see in the 5th episode, and she was like really upset, and I'm shoving a camera up into her face and feeling rather terrible about doing it. And of course, one of the amazing things about, this is a side note, is I remember when things got rough, I would have like the equivalent of what would Jesus do? I would go like, what would Ksenia do? Because she would fall apart and then like 5 seconds later would get herself together and be back to business and get things done and calling lawyers and figuring things out. So she falls apart. She immediately kind of tells this person what lawyer they need to call and what to do. And then she's like, no, and I apologize to her. And she's like, no, it's okay. I film people. And that made me feel, somehow it made it feel like at all times I was aware that in some sense it was a collaboration. How did it feel for you?
I don't cry so much usually, guys. I'm sorry. You know, my fiancé was already 2 years in prison when the full-scale war began. So I was filmed, I was photographed already. I felt as a character, like, yes, as Ola said, usually we work as a journalist, but I knew already what is it to feel like you are a character, protagonist. But it was a new experience to let you just film the whole stuff, like my life, like my regular life with my cat and books and how I cry. And yeah, I think it was traumatized sometimes, but not because of Julia, but just watching this when you think that you already forgot some of these things. Rewatch it was hard for me today, but also it felt like a freedom also, and I was so glad to see all these people that I love on the screen, and even all these our stupid jokes felt not so stupid actually, because like I understand how much we did for these people on screen, how we grew up from this to the point where we are now, and also this wouldn't happen without you. You were part of this bad trip.
And I think all of us had a sense, one of the things that allowed it is that we had a sense of purpose. I think it's what you talk about, Anya, is that, you know, this documentation, that something historic was happening. And, you know, this world really doesn't exist in Russia. This is, and probably won't exist in Russia for some time. I mean, in the way that it was. This is the last days when there was a very vibrant, active opposition community that is now almost entirely in exile.
Yeah, and you know, as a journalist, as my friends described it, as a journalist, I'm usually on the other side of the camera. But at some point, maybe even before we started filming, at some point I realized that you, from time to time, you have to make yourself a subject of your own research, and that helps, and your own experience, your own like body experience, you living inside Putin's Russia and understanding what it means. It is helpful, and it is really painful to be, I believe you saw a lot of shame and desperation and a lot of things I'd prefer nobody would ever see, but I hope that I'm very practical here. I hope that it might be useful.
So this is part one that we just saw of a multi-part film, and of course we're all so invested in these people that we've been sitting with for 5 hours. So I'm wondering if you could just give us a little preview of part two, or just say a little bit about what's been happening with some of these people, and plus, if you're here, you could say what's been happening with yourself in the past couple of years.
Nothing good, nothing good.
I wouldn't say so.
Well, all of the characters in the film, including the ones here and the ones not here, continue to work as journalists in exile. The film picks up, part two picks up with them literally, you know, people had bought, as you saw, tickets to the, you know, wherever they could with a few hours notice, went to the airport. So for example, we see Ksusha, you know, 2 days later in Istanbul, moving hostels with, we start to meet other characters. For Lera, who is the 22-year-old host at TV Rain, becomes a character. And she's in Istanbul, and she's like, yesterday I had a job, I was an adult, I had, you know, purpose in life, and people are completely lost. They don't have work, they don't know what the rest of their lives look like. And then as they get back up on their feet as journalists, continue to work, and also struggle morally. I think one of the things that is really interesting to me in the exile half is that, you know, yesterday for most of the first half, this is the, you know, the opposition, the people who stood up to Putin's regime, and suddenly they have to carry the weight morally in some ways for a war that they all oppose. And what is your role there? How do you behave in that situation? And I think all of them have continued to work, have continued to take accountability in an incredible way. And they face increasing threats. I mean, there's, you know, just fun facts, and then I'll tell you what you guys can talk about what you're doing. We don't want to give too much away. It's kind of hard. Like, I want to tell you everything they've been doing, but then, you know, you won't watch part two. But there's 2 articles in the New York Times that this week that directly relate to people in the film. There's an editorial about Putin pursuing, with secret services, the opposition abroad. And 2 of our characters, Lena and Alesia, are mentioned. Physical threats to them are mentioned in that editorial. There's also kind of, I guess, fun fact, there's a big story in the magazine on the deserter, about a guy who deserts from the Russian army. Well, the guy who helped him desert is the founder of Idite Lesam, Grigory Sverlin, who Anya interviews in the first episode about founding homeless shelters, and who then shows up at dinner parties at her house, the one who shows up and they say he slept till 6 p.m., and then he talks about like sending Putin a petition to fuck off. So now he's founded an organization to help Russian soldiers desert. So people are doing incredible work. And do you want to talk? I mean, I can. Ole and Sonia continue to do their podcast, and Ole freelances.
Yeah, I can talk. So yeah, we are continuing doing our podcast. It's amazing podcast. Please subscribe and follow us everywhere. And I actually want to say that I was always like, who is going to watch it, Julia? Like, we are so boring persons, and like, why? But now I can see that. Thank you for the interest, like in our boring lives, and it's really important for us to see that people want to know what's happening in Russia and what's happened with us. And so thank you that you actually watch this. And yeah, we live, both of us, Sonia and me, we live now in Barcelona, which is unexpected. But so far, yeah, we're doing our podcast, and we made amazing season about sisters. Their brothers decided to go to the war, and it's all about what's going on in modern Russia and what's consequences like right now happening. What else? My dog moved with me. And the rest of all you can watch in the part 2, I think.
I should note that, it sounds really nice, Barcelona, but how many countries have you had to move since you left?
I don't want to, I don't want to being sad, because it's a very sad movie, and I actually want to be happy, even it sounds weird. And after all that we had in our lives, it's like the first year when I actually feel better, because being an immigrant and being in exile as a journalist, it's difficult. So I don't want to concentrate on the bad things. Now it's really getting better, and we are continuing to do our job, and we continue to tell the story about what's going on inside Russia. I hope so. The optimism.
Okay. After I left, I lived in 7 countries. My fiancé was sentenced to 22 years in prison. Some of my friends were recently exchanged because we had an exchange of political prisoners. So I met Ilya Yashin, for example, who you saw today. I worked as a journalist, and all these 2 years I interviewed survivors of this war, people from Ukraine, and also in this point where I was in these parts of film, I always thought about project of helping families of political prisoners, but I needed help, and I always hoped that someone one day will make this project, but no one did, so I did it. And we help political prisoners in Russia with and their families with lawyers and therapy. Yeah, political prisoners in Russia and Belarus. But I also, as Ola, I don't know, I think the most important thing is that we all try to be happy and to be thankful to every day that we live and just enjoy small things.
So I'm still working at TV Rain. It's already 10 years now. And at the same time, I'm currently based in New York. I don't know where I live, and I can't answer this question. I'm currently based in New York, and I co-founded a project dedicated to actually, I described this approach. We are saving and preserving the archives of Russian independent media and Russian NGOs and human rights organizations. And pretty much our goal is not only to keep it safe, but only to make it speak, to testify, to bring evidence. And so mostly I do one thing. I try to make a historical record and make it speak, not to be silent. And this project is called RIMA, Russian Independent Media Archive. And that's it, I believe. And yeah, in terms of how it's going, I genuinely take my 5th.
Fair enough.
TV Rain is now based in, they also had to move several countries, like everyone on this stage. And they're based in Amsterdam and continue, they've been declared an undesirable organization, a criminal organization. It's criminal to give them an interview. It's criminal to repost their things. But they still provide a service to people in Russia, where I think if you're, like all of your work, if you're living in a small town in Russia, or even in a big city in Russia, you cannot talk to your neighbors about your feeling about the war. Your children cannot mention their feelings about being opposed to the war, or that their parents are opposed to the war. They can't say this in school because, there have been cases of people, like, if their children said this and they were sent to jail. But you can listen to Ola and Sonia's podcast or Ksyusha's podcast on political prisoners, or watch Anya's show on TV Rain. And you can feel like you're not alone, you're not crazy. I think, Hannah Arendt talked about totalitarianism feeds on loneliness. It needs loneliness. And I think for people in Russia turning this on and seeing that you're not crazy, there are other people who think like you.
Do we have some questions in the audience? We'll go right there towards the back. Yeah.
Thank you. This might be a very naive question, but with the United Nations in session this week, was consideration ever given to offering an invitational screening?
They didn't ask us, and I thought it might be presumptuous for us to offer. So we would love that, but I don't really quite know who to contact at the United Nations, but hopefully we'll get some.
Yes. Sorry. Yes. Mike is coming. The guy first.
I don't know. You can do it first if you want.
He did raise his hand first, but go ahead.
Is this on?
That's very nice.
Yeah. I just want to thank you for this film in light of Project 25, which we have to confront in this country whether we want to or not, and the fact that the freedom of the press, the Fourth Estate, is an imperative, and you have brought that out very, very clearly. I thank every single one of you for your bravery, for your courage, for your standing for the truth in light of this monstrous individual who is in front of the Hague for, or they would like to put him in front of the Hague, for war crimes. So what you've done is phenomenal, and how can we, as Americans, help to get the truth out with individuals in our own nation who think that Putin is a wonderful human being? How? What do we do?
So now we have this same feeling that you do. What is there to be done that a normal, average person can do?
Well, I think this film was my way of doing something. It's what you said about being useful in a way. I think there's every single one of us on this stage would love to see Putin face a war tribunal. But also I think it's about, not just about Russia, obviously, as you said. The idea of what does it mean to live, the broader themes for me, what does it mean to be the opposition living under a government that you oppose? What is your role? What can you do? And also the question, frankly, we probably all know people who cavalierly say, well, if Trump gets elected again, I'm leaving the country. And what does that mean? Do you just leave the country and leave it to them? What are you supposed to do? At what point? And I think that's one of the reasons that every one of you stayed, is you felt a duty to do things within Russia while you could, until you were forced to leave. And, we speak about leaving the country as something some great, I don't know, like a great thing to do. It's not, I mean, at what point do you figure out when to leave?
Well, I believe that in terms of what can be done, I have only one answer: support Ukraine immediately. But definitely, what are we dealing here with? We are dealing with the inner American situation, which is definitely very weird and very difficult. And part of your country knows that and supports Ukraine. And I don't need to persuade them, and I don't need to present them something. We are already on the same page. And here we go with the situation of polarization of the country, of dividing it into parts. And we are familiar with the situation, and we are familiar with the feeling that you don't know part of your country, and your country can attack you from your backyard all of a sudden, and you don't know these people, and you don't understand how it's possible. And even if you try, and even if you try to understand what are their pain, for instance, if you try to feel for them, you don't succeed, and it is dangerous. And all my possible answers will be speculative and just some rhetorical figures. I think that, well, if our experience could be useful, that's good, because I believe that all countries are different, and we have a lot of countries under dictatorship and under authoritarian regimes, but at the same time we have democratic countries with very unpleasant signs. And if we can share some experience, that would be, don't ignore unpleasant signs. They definitely become something more important and bigger than just science. It is important. It won't pass. So.
This will be our.
I'll just jump in one thing. I had a friend who's a very well-respected Latin American filmmaker, and he said to me, he's like, well, Putin was provoked. Putin's not, maybe, he's like, there's two sides to every story. I kind of tried to keep a straight face for a minute, and then he watched my movie and called me and apologized. So I think if that's one thing small thing I can do to help, in terms of supporting Ukraine, that helps.
Yeah. And this will be our last question. Yeah.
Well, I think you've touched onto this to a certain degree, but it's fascinating to me to look at the issue of the conflict between being a documentary filmmaker or a television reporter, journalist, and being an activist, and how you find a balance between the two. Because I think a large part of what we're talking about post this film that we just saw is how to find that balance. What day do you involve with your activism? When do you fall back to journalism? Because journalism requires a certain distance, and activism requires a certain degree of engagement. So I'd like to hear what you three feel about the balance between the two.
Such a good question. Yeah. But, I think for us, a lot of people... I still worked as a journalist when my fiancé was arrested. And I even was sometimes my colleagues asked me to tell something about him. And I sat there at the studio and I just thought, who am I right now? Am I a journalist? Should I tell about him as a journalist or as his partner? So I think it's a really difficult question. But at the same time, a lot of people even before the full war in Ukraine, a lot of people told to us, you are an activist, you are not objective enough. But I don't think so. In our specific case, that we were objective, and we are objective when we are telling that Putin is a monster and that he destroyed a lot of lives of Ukrainians and people in Russia and political prisoners. But for me personally, the answer is that yes, every time when I write something, I think as who I write this, as a partner, I cannot be angry, for example, when I write something about political prisoners. I have to write with a cold mind, but still it's a part of me that just... And he was sentenced to 22 years in prison also because he's a journalist, and sometimes in our situation you just cannot be objective.
Yeah, and I think just to add to this point, being a journalist, it doesn't mean that you're not allowed to have civil rights, you're not allowed to vote or to express your opinion, some sort of topics. So, for example, I think I got arrested when Ksyusha fiancé was imprisoned, and I just remember my feeling that my heart was what's going on with my community? Why journalists, it shouldn't be like that. And so if there is a way to show up for your people, even as journalists or your people in general, activists, I think you should do it. And for me, I saw all the rallies for the last more than 10 years since 2012. as a journalist, but if I was like a regular person, if I was like, I don't know, like student or teacher, or I would do the same. I will go for the protest, I will show up for my people. And I think it's like basic rights that you can express your opinion.
You know, I honestly don't believe, and maybe I even hate this separation, journalism, activism. And in any case, not in special exotic cases, I don't believe it. Well, maybe in terms of wording, in terms of formats and genres, in terms of using right words, there are some basic ground rules because journalism is mostly common sense. Actually, it's a set of skills and a common sense, and there are some rules, you have to obey them. But in terms of ideology, I don't believe in this separation, and I don't think it's useful. I don't think it works, and I don't buy this idea itself. I never had this dilemma for me. I always knew that I was an activist, and like, you know, people in charity often say that if you want to help, you can donate money, but it would be much better if you use your own professional skills and figure out how you can help in this direction of your professional skills, of your life skills, how you can make it part of your life. So I have these skills, and I'm an activist, and I'm doing this. And I really, maybe I'm so allergic to this separation because we had separate several cases when this separation led to very unpleasant consequences. And it's our inner, like, stories, and I won't spend time describing them, but I don't like it, and I saw many examples when it didn't work, and I understand why it doesn't work.
Did you know, just fun fact, I remember I was very shocked when a friend who, I mean, you probably know this all because you're journalists, but a friend who worked for the Washington Post told me she couldn't go to a protest with me because, you know, it's part of their employment contract. You're not supposed to go and protest if you work, I think. Certainly for the Washington Post, I believe the New York Times too, but I think it's everywhere, this idea, and it's very strange to me.
Agreed. Thank you so much for the film, and thank you for your work, all of you.
Thank you.